Welcome to the Wing Space podcast, a place to take up space, a space for you to settle in, sit back, relax, and focus a little bit on health, wellness, faith, family, and this crazy thing called life.
This podcast is not a replacement for mental health treatment or professional health care. In case of crisis or emergency, please contact your local healthcare provider or dial 911.
Hey there, and welcome to the Wing Space podcast, a place to take up space. We are in our third season of the podcast, and this season we're sitting down with community experts to chat about topics that we think are important to you, our listeners. And today it's my pleasure to sit down with one of Hope and Healing's very own therapists, Jenny Maguire, to talk about teens and therapy and how to engage them in therapy in a healthy way. So, Jenny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. Like you just said, I'm Jenny. I've been here at Hope and Healing for about a year and a half. Just recently moved from the Leonardtown office to a fully virtual telehealth position. We're military and moving across country in a couple of months. I've been working with and helping families navigate different things, about therapy and their experiences for a couple of years, and also working with families that are experiencing trauma symptoms and working through that treatment as well. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. And our topic today is really for the parents in our audience. I'm not quite sure we have many teens that are listening, although I would love to believe that our children are sharing it with all their friends and they're listening to it. But the truth is, it's probably, more focused at our parents who are listening. And we know that mental health therapy has taken a bad rap in recent years. I should say in years past. And we're slowly coming out of a stigmatized arena, and it's decreasing, so people are much more likely to engage in services. But I think for some teenagers, they're still pretty resistant.
I would have to agree with you in terms of forcing your kids to come to therapy or mandating therapy, even outside of the adolescent years. There tends to be natural and also manufactured barriers to getting those outcomes that maybe the parent is looking for or the therapist would hope for. So maybe we can have a little bit of conversation about what might be helpful if that's the situation that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of those natural or manufactured barriers that you have seen in the work that you do?
Yeah, parents want what's best for their kid. I really believe that they're doing their best and they're trying to give their children what's best. So from a provider's perspective, I find that we are working really hard to help the client feel safe and comfortable, which is already difficult if they feel like they aren't given a choice to be there, if they're feeling powerless as to whether or not they can go to therapy. So, kind of having the conversation with them early on about the process of therapy and that approach, focusing on your approach with your teens will be a good start. I know that as parents, and I'm also a parent of teenagers, we're sometimes struggling at home or with school, and therapy can be the last attempt or maybe even a desperate one. So being careful not to imply that you've given up on your kid and then this is outsourcing, even though in some ways it is. Working with parents and the caregivers and the kid or the teen has been the most effective. So when you think about how much time clients spend with their therapist, how much time they spend together compared to the time they spend at home and at school with the family, talking to your kid about being involved with their therapy is going to be helpful.
So what you're saying about the time that we spend with our clients is spot on. I often tell my clients, whether they're a teenager or an adult, the 60 minutes that we spend together is nothing compared to, 168 hours in a week. That's what it is. And if 1 hour a week is spent with us, imagine how much more influence there is with the other people that they're spending time with, including, like you said, home and school, their family, their friends. So how can a parent become involved and start that conversation with their teenager, maybe before it's that last-ditch effort, before it's that, okay, I don't know what to do, you're got to go to therapy, because then we also know the kid thinks it's punitive and that they're being punished.
Right. I can't tell you how many times I feel like I'm having that conversation with the teenagers in the session that they're only there because their parents are making them. But I would suggest having the conversation. It might go something like, you acknowledging that they don't want to be there. I hear that you don't want to go to therapy, but I'm doing this out of love. And because I love you, I'm going to bring you, and even acknowledging that, your role as a parent is not for them to like you, and they can ignore you and they can express themselves. That might look like yelling and screaming, but also, helping them understand that that you're doing this out of love and out of an attempt to help. And then I think also asking questions about how they're feeling, even telling them, you just have to go for a few sessions, because once they're in the door, then we can do a lot of that work. We can help them buy into what they could benefit from by being there.
Yeah, and how do you then sell that to the teenager and to their parent?
Yeah, so in terms of someone's first experience in therapy, I feel like a lot of the conversation has to do with letting them know it's their space and that it looks different for everyone. With teenagers who are being made to come to therapy, I usually want them to share with me what they think is going on here, what they think will happen, what they think they're here for, or even what do you think your parents are saying you're here for, kind of giving them permission to talk about their parents in a way that maybe they haven't had permission to say some of that stuff. Also giving them permission to talk about things that don't seem therapeutic or important at all. That can look like social media trends or, music, their favorite foods. It could be drama at school. There's a lot that they have to say. I think once they feel like this is my space to do with what I need and not my mom and dad's space, they feel a little bit more comfortable.
Absolutely. And we have to speak their language. We have to connect with them, and you and I know, and it's important for our listeners to know that the relationship that we have with our clients is the biggest and the best tool that we have. And so we have to connect to them and talk to them about random things. And I love it. One time, I know we're talking about teens, but I was working with a kiddo one time, and he was a little guy, I think he was 8 or 9, and we were playing chutes and ladders, and he was having some serious frustration every time he had to go down that chute. And we were really working on frustration tolerance and losing gracefully, and we had a fantastic session. And he walks out, and his mom was like, "How was therapy?" And he was like, "All I did was play games." And it's wink, wink to mom, because, yeah, in his mind, we just played games, but we had a really great session. And I think for teens, us having those conversations about, like you said, the drama at school or what's happened on social media and things like that, it creates that connection that next week they might be more likely to open up and have a conversation with us about what's really going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of, yeah, just to piggyback off of that, I've had that conversation with parents that kind of goes the other direction, where they're saying what do you mean? It's been 3 sessions. All you're doing is playing with them. You're only playing games or Uno, or, they say all you do is talk about school, and I really want them to do their chores, or, something to that effect. And, I think that we as therapists know that, primarily therapy is effective when you have a relationship. And so that's part of it, is building a relationship. And that can look different for lots of different ages, but it can also take different lengths of time, and so kind of trusting that process, that we're asking them to do a really uncomfortable thing. We're asking them to talk about a really uncomfortable topic in so many sessions. There isn't a time limit, and so playing that game, having those conversations, you're almost building a friendship with them, which can be difficult for parents to kind of release that to a stranger, to another adult in their child's life. But inevitably, when something happens in their life that they need support outside of their home, they have it. They have that space that they can trust, they can be vulnerable in, and they know this person already. So it's not trying to, respond to crisis without having a trusting relationship.
Yeah, one of the best experience I had, and I'm sure you have many of them as well, was when I had a teenage client who had a difficult situation going on, and told mom, I want to talk to you about this, but I want to talk to Jen about it first. And I loved that. And the parent was very supportive of that dynamic, because we do want them to know that they can come and they can talk to us about whatever it is that might be going on in their world. And sometimes what's going on in their world is not in line with the goals that mom and dad might have for what's going on in mom and dad's world. And also helping to normalize that lots of people go to therapy. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them. Again, sometimes they think it's punitive for the reasons why they're coming. So how would you explain to a teenage client or people in general why people go to therapy and normalize that for them?
Yeah, I mean, good question, because it looks different in every session, of course. But that's because people come to therapy for so many different things. You know, the parents are fighting, they don't know how to make friends, someone in their circle is struggling and they want to know the best way to help. Their parents are making them, something terrible maybe happened to them, or their grades are suffering, they broke up, they have a secret, you know, they heard it was good, they saw it on TikTok, you know, they want to have someone they can trust. Lots of different reasons, you know. I feel like there isn't really a lot that people don't come to therapy for. I've even had people tell me like, oh, I saw one of my favorite characters in a show, you know, go to therapy, and so I wanted to give it a try. I mean, it's funny listening to all the different reasons why people come, but it's also heartwarming because, you know, people feel supported and they're getting the help they want.
Yeah, I feel like as stigma diminishes, some of the portrayals of us in media are becoming a little bit more accurate. I mean, I've definitely had clients that have walked in before and they're like, where's the couch that I'm supposed to lay down on? Or, you know, I have a love seat style couch in my office. You can't really lay down on it. And, you know, they're like, well, how am I supposed to lay down on this? You know, where's your clipboard, you know, doctor? And the portrayal of us, I think, is different. And so people, I think, are sometimes surprised by what they experience when they engage with us in a normal conversation about random life stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I've had a lot of people talk about just the comfort level of my office when I was working in person there in Leonardtown. I know that my coworkers sometimes would tease me about like being really into the aesthetic, but I can't tell you how many times clients would come in and the first thing they would say is, your office is so cozy, or, you know, I really appreciate that little magnet and what it has to say. It makes me feel included, you know, things like that. So the environment is of course important, you know, and I think when I think of working with teenagers, that's one of the things I try to kind of focus on is like, if I were a teenager or if I were a young adult who was coming to talk to someone about something that was really difficult, something that was really uncomfortable, I would want the space that I'm in to feel a little more comfortable, just to take that edge off, just to kind of ease that transition. So it's super important.
Well, and talking about that pop culture stuff really helps it to not feel so heavy at times as well, because we're not immediately coming out of the gate talking about, you know, all the hard stuff. So how do you engage with your teenage clients? How do you get them to open up for that first session and as you continue to work with them?
Yeah, I mean, I like to pride myself in being one of the therapists that can really get kids to talk. I think I'm so casual. Sometimes I have to remind myself I'm the professional in the room and I need to not be like the fun auntie or whatever. I'm a therapist and like, this is my job. But I really do enjoy having those conversations because like to us, that stuff feels insignificant and small. But to teenagers, it is their whole world. They don't have the mortgages. They don't have the marriages. They don't have these large, you know, bigger world problems. They have their friend group and their sport and their test and their boyfriend or girlfriend, and that's like their entire big problem in the world. And so it makes me feel like I can set aside my problems and like really like just kind of sit in that for a minute and they feel comfortable with it. I kind of meet them where they are. I've had a couple of clients that are pretty resistant to open up, like they are not gonna budge. You know, all our training is like roll with that resistance, you know, don't argue back with them. So I usually, you know, kind of just confirm that it's hard to talk, that I'm a stranger, but people that know them, I'm not knowing them yet, but people that do know them, their parents or maybe other caregivers, they're concerned and they've asked me to do a job because they care for their teen. And so I'm here to see if there's a problem. And in order to do that, we need to talk. And that can be about anything, whatever they want to talk about. And I'll be the first to tell you, I've sat through an hour-long session and only colored with a client. And that was what they needed that day, you know, to know that no one was pushing them beyond that. And that was effective.
Yeah, so me playing Chutes and Ladders, you coloring with a client, it's all a part of creating that relationship, developing that trust, and then getting the client to a place where they're willing to talk. And sometimes they just don't want to talk. The words are not coming out. They're not saying anything. They're not showing us anything.
Yeah. I mean, in situations like that where they don't even want to color, like that we're not talking at all and they are clearly unhappy about being there, I am enemy, like that's it. I've been known to say something like, okay, so it's clear that you don't want to be here. Maybe even I will describe what I can see in their body language, like if they're slouched down, if they're looking at the wall, and like, or if they're on their phone with their, earbuds in or whatever. I'll say, you tell me what we need to do to convince your parents or whoever brought them there that you don't need to be here. Like, what does that look like? For all the things they think are wrong with you to be fixed, and then you can be done. How will they know that you're done? And sometimes I think that's like the last straw for me is like, hey, I don't want this to also be a negative experience for you. I think no therapist wants their clients, to leave therapy being like, that was a waste of time, I don't want to go back ever, because whether it's with me or another therapist, I want them to have a positive experience so they have that access to a resource later in life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and sometimes the reason why kids don't want to come to therapy or they don't want to engage is because they're convinced that we're just there as a spy, and we get the question, or we kind of sense that the question is, are you going to tell my parents everything? Or even asking, some of them will say, well, what are you going to tell my parents? And I know that that's a big question that especially the older teens have, and it is important for confidentiality. It's important for parents to understand it as well as teenagers. So how do you bring that conversation in for them to understand confidentiality?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. This is a concern. Even with kids I've worked with for like several years, they still don't know what they can tell me. They still have that question. Like, some of them I started working with when they were in middle school, and now they're in high school, and they are doing high school things that they don't want their parents to know about. And they will ask me, well, what can you tell my parents? I hear this question so often. Mm-hmm. So in terms of confidentiality, of course, there's going to be some benefit to talking to other people to gain perspective on how the behaviors are showing up, whether that's with their parents or their school counselor, any family member that's involved. I always explain to them, if it's not a safety concern, right? If I'm not worried that you're hurting yourself, someone's hurting you, or you want to hurt another person, what you say in here stays in here without written permission. I cannot talk about it. Not with your parents, not with your friends, I can't even tell my clients whose friends also see me that I see their friends, even though we all know that they know that I know that we see each other. And yep. So I use that conversation as a way of saying, like, this is your space. Of course, they need to understand right out the gate that I'm a mandated reporter. And so we have lots of conversations. We don't rush through it, but anything that has to do with safety, that can sometimes be confusing, right? Because they're like, well, using, drugs might be unsafe. Well, sure, but that's a conversation we're going to have. Or, maybe having risky behaviors, doing things that maybe would be endangering them. These are conversations that we're going to have together, and trying to help the parents trust that as a professional, I'm navigating that with their teen, and also as a licensed professional by the state, I have a legal obligation, right? And so it is a tricky thing to navigate with teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a barrier. And what can also become a barrier is that we do need to have both, we need to have the parents or the caregivers on board along with the teenagers on board. And sometimes the parents are asking about why aren't you telling me that? So there's this conflict in terms of who you can tell what to. So what do you say to parents to get them on board with the idea that the kid's driving the boat when it comes to confidentiality?
Yeah. In my experience, helping parents understand that this is a partnership. They are the expert at their child, and I might be the expert at other things, when it comes to child development or when it comes to communication styles and, normal teenage behaviors. those are the areas that I would say I feel well versed in. But your child, you've known them, you'll always have known them longer than I do and know things about them that I couldn't tell you, and I never want to give the impression that I know your child better than you, even if they're willing to talk to me about things that they won't talk to their parents about, which you and I know is a very normal part of adolescent development. But I have those conversations, and I also really harp on the therapeutic alliance. This is the thing that makes the difference. When parents are worried about, we've been coming here, nothing is changing, or all they talk about is this or that, and it doesn't seem significant to the parent, I really go back to, like, we're building a relationship here between an adult and a teenager, which is already, a barrier, but also between a stranger, and someone who might be perceived as partnering with the parent more than with the teen. And so I always want to have that conversation kind of open with the parents, and I let the client know, like, I'm not talking with them to tell them what you said, and I say the same thing to the parent. I'm not talking to you about what your child said in therapy. Kind of giving them that boundary has been really effective, at least in my work. And I also spend some time really talking about in the beginning, what the parents can expect. I don't wait until that's happening. I like that conversation to happen in the first session and with parent and teen together in the room, because that's when we set the expectation, right? And so also modeling for the teen that I don't have a problem setting a standard for your parent with you here, and vice versa, right? So everybody's on the same page and we're working toward the same goal. And I feel like that's been really, really effective in my work with parents and their teenagers, or caregivers and the teenagers they bring to therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is hard when we have a parent that comes in and they say, like, that you mentioned chores, they're not helping around the house, they've got a poor attitude, I can't get them to do anything, et cetera, and the kid comes in and there's like a major relationship issue going on at school that this teen is trying to navigate, and they have no emotional or physical energy to do laundry because they're navigating this relationship that their parents thinks is unimportant. So helping the parents understand that, if there is a major safety concern, certainly we're going to talk about that. If there's a major issue that's glaring, we can collaborate on that together, but really we're here to talk about what the kid wants to talk about and address the concerns that the child has, that the teenager has, and bring the parent into that as part of helping them to create a relationship too, because we're not going to always be around and they need to have that relationship with their parent.
Yeah, my clients call it mini Jenny, right? Because they take little mini Jenny with them, and it helps them in that relationship with their parents. And I love that. When I hear teenagers talk about, my mom and I talked about this before I came and talked to you, I am applauding them, and I am like a little cheerleader on the inside, because I want that relationship. I mean, I think there are definitely people who are in therapy, for years and years and years, because there are special circumstances that require that. But for the most part, people come to therapy to learn the skills they need to navigate these things on their own. And so if I can give them just a little piece of me and that little bit of knowledge and support that they found in my office, then they take Mini Jenny with them, and they have that little pocket therapist that's helping them in their, circumstances as they continue to go through life. And that's really like the goal, is that they can take what they learn in therapy and apply it in all the areas of their life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And much of what we've talked about, you've been speaking about your work with clients, but really all of our providers here that work with teenagers, it's going to look very similar. There may be a little bit of difference in terms of nuance or application, but for the most part, the parents that are listening can expect kind of the same thing that's going to happen when you're working with our providers, and probably working with other treatment providers outside of Hope and Healing too. It's an interesting dynamic in getting those teens into therapy, but then also navigating that relationship with the teenager and the provider.
Yeah. No, I would say that I think that, in conversations with my coworkers, like, we have very similar approaches when it comes to working with teens, all of us a little bit different, and that's good because not all our clients are the same. They need something different from each of us.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a great discussion, Jenny. I really feel like this is one of those conversations that, there may be part twos and part threes along the road as we go, because sometimes parents can't get their kiddo into therapy quite yet, but maybe there's some tricks and techniques that we can share as the podcast goes on. But for today, is there anything else that you think is important for our listeners to hear regarding teens and therapy?
I mean, I would say the most important thing is getting them in the door, and we've already given strategies about that. I really believe in the people that I work with, whether it's in Hope and Healing or just throughout the profession, and we're trained to help them come in and get what they need out of it. And so if you can get them in the door, and do that in a loving way and not in a threatening way and not in a forceful way, I think that's going to be leaps and bounds in the right direction.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, again, thanks so much, Jenny, for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm going to have to figure out how to get my own little mini Jenny to carry with me when you're no longer here in Maryland with us. But for now, thanks for joining me on the podcast. And listeners, thanks so much for listening. You can always reach us on our DMs through our socials. And I'm available via email, jennifer@hopehealingtherapy.com. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you guys have a great day.